As this impacts both the international and domestic politics and economics of several countries, there is a need to control the excessive foreign capital inflows, that is, especially in the developing economies. That's the debate that also gains momentum. In this edition of Public Forum, we'll try and analyze the currency wars as well as the currency fluctuation and impact on the political as well as economic stability of various countries. And joining us in the studio is Dr. Bhattachrya, Vice-Chancellor of JNU, Dr. Upendra, he's the Senior Fellow with Research and Information System for Developing Countries, and Dr. Jawaharlal, the Chairman of Indian Institute of Finance. So let us begin the discussion, first of all, by understanding the term currency wars. Dr. Upendra, how would you like to just brief us a bit on the currency wars?
Well, currency wars essentially mean, in the context of currencies fluctuating either upwards or downwards because of the responses of different countries, and one country's response being in response to another country's response, and all this is to actually stabilize their exchange rates, which is incumbent upon the demand as well as supply of capital flows. And this has wider macroeconomic implications domestically as well as globally. So I would caption it as if a country trying to defend its currency either upwards or downwards, depending on the situation, in response to another country, and if this response actually multiplies in different countries, then you may probably term it as currency war.
Okay, let us look at our position here. India has seen a dollar inflow over the past few months, and in fact the rupee has also risen as against dollar. How do you look at India really reacting to this currency war situation?
You see, India's stance has always been that to keep rupee weak. There are several reasons for this, and one of the most important reasons is that the exporters have a very strong lobby, and they want India to keep the rupee weak so that their competitiveness in the international market may be maintained, and they may be able to really sell more goods and services abroad. But it has its own implications. For instance, Sabha has very rightly pointed out that liquidity, buying dollars and intervening in the market and buying dollars has its own cost, because it increases liquidity, in turn it increases inflation, and when liquidity increases, the rate of interest may go up. That may also affect the competitiveness of the domestic industry. Of course, there are a number of other factors as well. So what we see really that India's currency has gained in the last 2 months by almost 8 to 9%. In my opinion, this gain is good, and the Reserve Bank of India or the central bank should not intervene so long as there are not too wide fluctuations and the factors are unexplainable. If the factors are explainable, for instance, if the dollar is getting weak, if the US economy is not doing well, if other currencies are not doing well, and India is gaining strength, and India is shining, doing well, then naturally India's currency would gain. And since our imports are more than exports, and we have a trade deficit, it is good for the country to have a stronger currency rather than a weak currency in the long run.
Okay, how do you really respond to this present situation, Dr. Bhattachrya?
Shalini, I think if we distinguish between two kinds of the currency volatility, one is the market-driven volatility, which comes from time to time demand and supply imbalances. The other is policy-induced intervention in the currency market to deliberately go contra-market. So the currency war that we are talking today is some countries, it began from China, who are deliberately trying to control the currency against the market determining value and doing it in a decisive way. It all began from China, who was artificially keeping his own currency weak, even though they have $3 trillion worth of foreign exchange reserves, all their own, forcing USA now to retaliation. Okay, if you can do it, we'll do it. Actually, euro has already gone down quite a bit in the last couple of months. Then USA finding the three major trading blocks, Euro, China and USA. USA is the loser. Euro has gone down, partly because of its own internal problem of the debt crisis. China artificially and forcefully keeping its currency very much below. So USA stops. Now problem for countries like India now is three major players in the global market, all keen now to push their currency down. Had there been, say, one bloc against another bloc, India could have played the game. Now is the problem for India. It's a regular edge problem.
Most important is that not only internationally, if we look at the domestic response to this entire thing, Dr. Das, what is your opinion on this? The high capital inflows that we've seen and the way now country is coping up to deal with this.
Well, Indian response has been very cautious, and perhaps it is very correct because we don't want to enter into this currency war at this stage. We are watchful, and the government is watchful. Yes, our currency is appreciating. There are foreign institutional investors who are actually interested in India. Now, there is a flip side to it. I would say that this situation, in the aftermath of the global financial meltdown,
Right.
which essentially was characterized by liquidity crunch in the developed countries, today is seeing the problem of oversupply of capital to the developing world. And in that sense, I would say that at least liquidity is not a problem. But what needs to be underlined is what kind of liquidity. And that is where we need to be more watchful, that the hot money or the short-term capital inflows that are interested in the Indian market for speculative purposes, fine. To the extent that we have liberalized, we cannot say no to them at this stage. But we are watchful on that, and I'm very sure if this goes beyond a point, government will definitely intervene.
But at the same time, how do you really assess its impact on the advanced economies as well as the emerging economies?
Well, in terms of advanced economies, the capital is trying to flow into markets where it can be high returns, because it is not reaping high returns in other markets, including the developed world. So they are in search of high return. So they would definitely gain if they divert their capital to emerging markets. Emerging markets would definitely gain because of the liquidity. Now, if this liquidity availability is more in the form of foreign direct investment, which is actually, in a sense, employment generating, income generating as compared to foreign institutional investors, I would say that this kind of investment would be most welcome. Now, the pressure on our exchange rate and the recent appreciation definitely would be an outcome of both kinds of capital flows. But what worries us is that the recent inflows have been short-term capital flows, and we will have to be...
That is, it is more FII based than the FDI thing, which would have really helped us a lot.
Yes.
So does that really present a very positive picture for our country, for India?
Sorry?
Does that really present a very positive picture for our country? I mean, the kind of inflows that we are watching right now.
No, I think if we really carry out a social cost benefit analysis of fluctuations which are taking place, rupee versus dollar or rupee versus euro, then we would find there are lots of private costs and also private benefits. And at the same time, we find there are lots of social costs, but there don't seem to be much of social benefits when the rupee devalues or depreciates against dollar. If you really look at the private benefits, I would say private costs, I would say the cost of holding reserves is a very important cost for the Reserve Bank of India. More the reserves, more is the cost for holding those reserves. Of course, our reserves are very nice and comfortable, and therefore there is nothing much for us to worry about that. The second thing is industry using imported raw material, for instance, loses its competitiveness. If you import raw materials, add value to that, then you export that, then you lose your competitiveness. And even domestically, it adds to your inflation. Therefore, there is a private cost to the industry. Foreign travel, advertising, publicity becomes costly. Because when the rupee is cheap, rupee is weaker, at that time the ticket which you take or the advertising which you carry out, the publicity you carry out internationally, and even the foreign travel would be costlier, and therefore it would better people not to resort to that. And unless you advertise your products and services, and also India internationally, it would become difficult for us really to sustain. Lastly, the importers may also, pay more and get less in terms of quantities because it is in terms of rupees. Similarly, there are social costs involved. For instance, there is an inflation. There is a both cost push as well as capital in terms of capital cost. When there is a cost push, for instance, the raw material which you are importing, first of all, the transportation cost is worked out in terms of dollars, insurance cost is worked out in dollars, customs duties are paid on rupee when it is 50 rupees and it is 40 rupees. So 10 rupees differential means extra payment to be made. Then value addition will be on 50 rupees, not on 40 rupees. And then excise, customs and even the sales tax, etc. will be added on rupees 50, not on 40. All that adds to adding to inflation, and therefore there is a cost push.
Okay, so there happens to be a lot of, there are sort of lot of things which have an impact basically on this. But in fact, minutes before this, Dr. Bhattachrya, you were talking about some policy-induced currency war here. Are we somewhere trying to say the kind of easy monetary policy of the advanced economies which was considered to be the root cause behind this?
Well, there is a subtle difference between the easy monetary policy to finance the government's budget, especially the deficit budget. The other one is here tackling the external transactions of the nation.
Okay.
So one is concerned about domestic transactions,
the other one
the other one is external. Now, coming to the question, if all the major blocks of the world are determined to undervalue their currency, then first of all, India will have a limited option. We are not yet a major player to decisively influence the global trend. Though we are not yet a large transactor in the global market as yet, but we are caught in the dilemma. So what we can do? A, we try to restrict the inflow of FII. Now let me give an example. China, in spite of such a huge foreign exchange reserves, in spite of complete open door policy with respect to investment, does not give a complete red carpet treatment to FII. That's the reason China is able to keep its exchange rate pegged. So it is not getting pushed by the domestic capital inflow of FII type. The other successful model that India should borrow, China is the worst case in that same extreme. Chile. Chile is the most stabilized currency market for nearly 30 years. Having suffered a lot during the 70s, Chile adopted a model that is now considered the textbook model for currency stabilization. Smaller level, Taiwan has done it. I would suggest India follow the Chilean model. Chilean model essentially means you keep a premium on the capital coming in terms of the return to the domestic.
Okay.
If foreign capital wants to have a parking, don't allow for parking. Allow them for investment purpose. If they still want to have a parking lot, tell them 30% is reserved with us for our long-term investment, which we don't do. You see, in that case, the real genuine FIIs
would enter.
were looking at the market of 9% or 10% GDP growth, want to take advantage. But India, unfortunately, is not having enough confidence to adopt this model, which Chile has done it very successfully. So is China. Although Chinese artificially peg their currency, but in terms of FII, they also make it clear. You are not given a freedom to come fly-by-night operators. Yes, our stock market will welcome you, but then you must stay for a certain period of time.
Right.
Indian FII policy is you pay zero tax if you stay for 1 year, or if you can also route it through Mauritius, again it is zero. And half the FII coming through Mauritius route, if you look at the RBI data. If you stay otherwise, non-Mauritius, and stay only for 1 year, you pay only 10%.
Okay.
Whereas if you bring the capital through FDI, at return you pay 40%.
Okay. So there are a lot of differences there, and maybe some sort of reforms also required in that direction.
China is the reverse direction.
Okay.
It's a less tax on FDI.
Right.
More tax on FII.
Okay. Okay, so that's a very important thing that Dr. Bhattachrya has pointed towards. Time for a very short break in Public Forum. Stay tuned for more.
आपकी छोटी सी नादानी से कितने लोग परेशान होते हैं। हम सबको अपने अधिकारों की रक्षा के साथ साथ अपने पर करने का निर्माण भी करना चाहिए।
बहन जी, रोशनी की माँ पिता आए हैं। नमस्ते। रोशनी की पढ़ाई अच्छी चल रही है। आजकल मैं उसे गणित में जोड़ और घटाने के सवालों का खूब अभ्यास करा रही हूँ। बहन जी, सवाल हो गए। रोशनी की कॉपी तो देखिए, कल 10 में से 8 सवाल ठीक थे, आज सारे 10 के 10 ठीक हैं। शाबाश रोशनी। शाबाश रोशनी।
इलाज की गारंटी। उस्ताद जी, दमा, मिर्गी और शुगर का शर्तिया इलाज गारंटी के साथ, और पता भी लिखा है, आयुर्वेदिक दवा खाना रामगढ़। और खा गया ना बच्चा, ऐसे विज्ञापन ही तो हमें धोखा देते हैं। बिल्कुल सही, शर्तिया इलाज और चमत्कारिक दवा ये सब झूठ है। ऐसे विज्ञापन कानूनन निषेध है। ऐसे विज्ञापनों की सूचना स्टेट ड्रग लाइसेंसिंग अथॉरिटी को देनी चाहिए।
ड्रग्स और मैजिक रेमेडीज ऑब्जेक्शनेबल एडवर्टाइजमेंट एक्ट 1954 का उल्लंघन करने पर जुर्माना, सजा या फिर दोनों भी हो सकते हैं।
मैं तो समझ गया, और आप?
इस पहले में के चक्कर में हम न सिर्फ अपनी बल्कि दूसरों की जान भी जोखिम में डालते हैं। ये सड़क के लोगों के साथ साथ हमारी तहजीब के भी खिलाफ है। पहले आप, थोड़ा संयम, थोड़ी सावधानी, ना कोई टेंशन, ना कोई परेशानी।
Welcome back to Public Forum. In Public Forum today, we are discussing currency fluctuation and its impact on global economic and political stability. We know about the strong capital inflows from the advanced economies that has led to a sharp appreciation of rupee against the US dollar, and according to the data, the FIIs pumped in almost $34.36 billion between January and October in India. But before going into the break, as we were talking about the kind of structure we have in our country, Dr. Das, would you really concur with what Dr. Bhattachrya just said about having a model like the Chilean model or maybe even the Chinese model when it comes to FIIs the kind of model that we have for the FDIs rather should be probably replicated even in case of FIRs, or also to have a better model than this.
No, I'm very glad that Professor Bhattachrya mentioned the Chilean model. This is something which we also don't understand why we have not given serious consideration, and we should be doing it. In fact, between the Chilean and the Chinese model, there have been some other responses in recent times. For instance, Brazil imposed a transaction tax. I mean, not exactly that, but some kind of tax on foreign influence of that kind. Thailand has done. G20 finance ministers meetings that were being held in South Korea. South Korea itself has already done it. So, in some way, capital controls are also coming in isolated way, and that also is important to take note of. I would supplement Professor Bhattacharya's point, which was very valid, by saying that perhaps our responses need to be coordinated at the regional or global level. Now, at the global level, G20 is definitely handling issues, but I guess this is going to be a major issue when the forthcoming summit comes up. More importantly, this East Asia Summit, which is ASEAN 10 plus Japan, China, South Korea, India, Australia, New Zealand, and this year US and Russia are also expected to be there, which is ASEAN plus 6 plus 2.
Yeah.
I think tomorrow, possibly, I just hope that this summit takes cognizance of the need and imperatives of a coordinated effort to address quote-unquote currency wars. Because unless we do it in a regional forum, and regional forum of East Asia Summit kind actually...
But the finance ministers meet of the G20, the first part of G20 rather, was unable to address this issue. That is how the media reports are pointing to.
That's correct, that's correct. But I think we need to emphasize that unless a coordinated effort is made by major players, we would not be able to contain these individual country responses. And it is not it will not augur well for the health of the global economy.
Okay. Considering the kind of response that Brazil and Thailand have also given to it, do you think we need major reforms in the way we are dealing with these capital inflows?
I think we are handling the foreign exchange fluctuations fairly well. But as far as the question of China and Chile is concerned, Chile has only $2 billion foreign exchange reserves, small country, and very close to North America. It's a South American country. And therefore, the rich people and the bankers from America kind of influence their economy greatly. And therefore, they had to impose restrictions in terms of withdrawing money. The capital which comes into this, they have imposed various restrictions. As far as China is concerned, with foreign exchange reserves over $1 trillion, has the capacity to induct currency war internationally. The moment it decides that it is going to keep a part, 10%, 20%, 30% of its reserves into euro or in pound sterling or in dollar, the international market, shakes. India, with $280 billion, does not have that capacity. But at the same time, we have been, by and large, if you look at for the last 1.5 years or so, our dollar parity with rupee was about 48, 47, 49, and so on and so forth. It's only in the last 2 months that it has gained strength, and it is about 44 rupees, 70 paisa, 75 paisa, and it's fluctuating that way. I think we've been managing that. As far as capital inflows are concerned, we should not really worry about it. And if we really look at from both the Ministry of Finance and Reserve Bank of India would be interested to keep the rupee low, because there are private benefits accruing to Ministry of Finance, because the indirect taxes accruing to Ministry of Finance are much larger when the rupee is weaker. Similarly, when you prepare the balance sheet in rupee terms for Reserve Bank of India, with about $280 billion foreign exchange reserves, your balance sheet shakes, even if the rupee is stronger by 1 rupee. And therefore the balance sheet in rupee terms will be weaker. And therefore both of them have the private benefit. Exporters have the private benefit gathering out of the weak rupee. But ultimately, one needs to really see not from this one particular sector, from the whole point of view of the whole economy. We import about 70% of the oil from abroad. That has its effects directly on consumer prices, on inflation, on the growth, development of the economy. And therefore, that is a very important factor. They are large for our defense supply imports, for our capital equipments which we import from abroad. The cost of capital equipments will go up. The project cost will be high. And the ultimate cost of production will be high because the capital cost is high, because it is all in terms of rupees. I think a moderate value of rupee, which is determined by the market, should be accepted. When there are wide fluctuations, the central bank should intervene, because those wide fluctuations could be because of unexplained factors.
Okay, there is one important factor which has been, in fact, highlighted time and again, that these inflows really erode the export competitiveness of these nations. How would you please elaborate a bit on this?
They are politically and consumer point of view quite popular because they lead to stock market appreciation. Many people are rejoicing therefore. Those who are holding those stocks, the FII inflow has pushed the stock price, and Bombay Sensex crossed 20,000
right,
and so on. So you see, there are popular also appreciation of the positive side of the FII inflow. I presume that might be the reason why Government of India will be reluctant to suppress the FII inflow, because Bombay stock market upswing is considered to be a psychological barometer for state of the Indian economy. Whether we agree or disagree, unfortunately, it is considered in certain setting. So that point of view, FII is a very good thing. Your point is substantial. Coming to the real side of it, how much impact it makes on the real economy, I think lots of apprehensions are about it, because the FII tracing flows real economy impact has not been noted to be very big. There are indirect effects. Booming stock market is attracting a lot more private offering issues. So many companies have suddenly revived their market in issues, and they are raising lots of capital, and that means promoting the private investment. Hopefully this private investment over a period of time will generate more output and employment. Because when stock market goes down, companies are reluctant to issue public offers.
Okay.
So that is the reason. But then ultimately economics is all about balancing. You can't be completely swinging in one direction. So the Reserve Bank of India will have to operate within a balancing framework. To me, at the moment, rupee is still not that strong. Remember, a couple of years ago, it came even up to 38. And then we intervened. So, market can absorb some more time. And meanwhile, what will happen? Even if we rupee don't do, the global market competitions of currency war will prevail upon the larger players in the world market to push their currency up, and then by definition we will be also having some impact positively. So it has the integration of the global economy has now become so strong, many cases it can neutralize your domestic policy. That's why I highlight the fact China has now the muscle power in a manner which most European countries do not have intervention. In the whole of Europe, only Germany probably has some financial muscle power. The rest are all swinging. So, Americans, the present protectionist sentiment is, let us teach China a lesson. So, if China can do it, who will do it? So, it is not that America is inherently having a weak dollar. It is American sentiment has gone to such an extent. Teach China a lesson. So that is the factor. If the dollar becomes intrinsically weak, our capability to intervene in the market will also be further restricted.
Okay, so there's a lot of politics and economics impact involved in
some battle is going to be fought between China and America in particular. So India can watch for a while and don't jump into the bandwagon immediately.
Okay, so a wait and watch policy right now for India, as one of our panelists are also pointing towards. Time for a very short break in Public Forum Institute.
देश, समाज और राजनीति से जुड़े हर मुद्दे पर है हमारी नजर। Be it news from across the border or any interesting international news event.
शेयर बाजार की हलचल हो या हो कारोबार का हाल,
Or news from the world of sports.
तमाम खबरों पे हम करते हैं बात।
We bring you in-depth news analysis.
Every morning between 10 to 11.
Watch Perspectives only on Lok Sabha Television. चाचा,
अरे मीना,
स्कूल की छुट्टी है, मिलने चले आए। मीरा, तुम्हारी भी छुट्टी है ना? मैं स्कूल नहीं जाती।
स्कूल जाके क्या करेगी?
अरे पढ़ने लिखने से बिटिया की समझ निखरेगी, मान बढ़ेगा और तुम्हारी शान। चाचा जी, स्कूल में तो हम बहुत कुछ सीखते हैं। जमाना बदल रहा है, पढ़ाई ही बेटियों का असली गहना है। असली गहना है।
All that you wanted to know. All that you wanted to see. Everything related to your health is what we tell you in Healthy India. Every Saturday, live at 6 p.m.
Welcome back to Public Forum. In Public Forum today we discuss the currency fluctuation and the impact on the global economic and political stability. And if you want to be a part of this discussion, all that you need to do is call us on our toll-free numbers. Our toll-free lines are open for you. The numbers are 1-800-115314, 1-800-115313. So before going into the break, as we were talking about the kind of policy reforms that probably are required, and most importantly, the wait and watch policy that is supposed to be required by India at this point, as China and US really face this. It's also important to look at the way economies like Brazil and Thailand have responded, Dr. Das, because Brazil, as of now, it has raised its foreign inflow tax from 4% to 6%, and Thailand is known for its open economy and is also taking a recourse that way. How do you look at the kind of mechanisms that has been adopted by these countries?
Well, I mean, these are very natural responses because especially Thailand, when the Thai baht was under severe attack in 1997, it was the first country to have met with the crisis, and it was the contagion which actually made it spread to other countries. I would consider these responses as very natural responses. But let me just go back because conceptually we need to understand a few things when we discuss about the policy responses. The whole issue of export competitiveness through depreciation is sometimes, I feel, a little exaggerated aspect. There are economic and policy studies, the conclusions are not exactly the same. Why does that happen? When, say, rupee depreciates vis-a-vis dollar, say $100 worth of export earning received by an exporter post-depreciation would fetch him more rupees. Right? So in that sense, the exporter has earned more in terms of local currency, even if the dollar earning is the same. Now we presume that our export competitiveness would improve because we presume that the additional rupee that he has got because of rupee's depreciation would actually be passed on to further lowering of export price when he sends the next consignment. That might not happen, right? If it does not happen, then depreciation of exchange rate and local currency increased earning may not get reflected in increased exports. So this linkage is not automatic. Now, if this linkage is not automatic, then that brings me to the second point, that exchange rate variations, this is only one of the variables of determining, say, export performance. Import is a different thing. Import is dependent on GDP and things like that. But as far as export performance is concerned, exchange rate, which is a price factor, is only one of the variables. There are many non-price factors. Also, exchange rate is only one of the variables in the sense that even if we have increased our export competitiveness, exports are as much a function of the global demand as much they are in terms of domestic. So, and there was a fallacy of competition in 1997 when everybody's export competitiveness increased in Southeast Asia in the same lines of products, and there was a glut in the global market. So that doesn't help. My point is that we need to understand that this entire dynamics of export, import, and the trade balance and current account deficit, what they exactly mean for the internal domestic economy, they are basically different components and they have to be treated as differently, and we have to have an holistic view in terms of the policy responses. I think we are putting too much emphasis on exchange rate and currency.
Okay, we are joined by a caller right now from Jammu and Kashmir, Ms. Arushi. Please put your question, Arushi.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Now I wanted to know one thing. All the panelists who are talking about the fluctuations in the value of the money have not noticed one thing and talked about it yet. That is, if we go by month-wise analysis of the depreciation, has been a trend which has been followed, really, that during the month of December, because most of the countries who invest in our economy are the European countries or America, so they are the countries who, close to the Christmas and the New Year celebration, have to give bonanzas to the employees, and for that they need the money back. So we are definitely going to see these people the money back, and then we for sure going to see the depreciation of the money. So why that sort of hysteria is being created? Because this is something that is going to be a to and fro process. One more thing that I want to know is, this is a very general, perhaps very basic economic question, but I don't have the knowledge of this, and that is, I wanted to know the basic difference between FIIs and FDIs.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Arushi, for both those questions. Would you like to respond to that, Dr. Vivar? Or I think Dr. Bhattachrya, please respond to this question.
Well, the FDI is called foreign direct investment. When investment comes to generate physical investment leading to output and employment, say factory created out of the foreign capital, or it could be a new business activity arising out of the foreign capital, they are called FDI. FDI adds to the total domestic investment. It's part of the total domestic investment. FII, foreign institutional investment, is basically there are already investment made in the country, you are trading in them. It could be in the form of stock market, it could be in the form of the currency market, it could be in form of government bonds. So here you are not adding directly to new capital. You are trading in the existing capital and making whatever the returns are to be. So FDI and FII, therefore, they are totally different in nature. FDI is adding to your capital formation. FII is trading in your existing capital formation. So that is the basic difference between the two.
Okay, and also she was talking about the trend which happens to be a to and fro thing, the money appreciation, the depreciation, because it has to meet also the requirements of the advanced economies, and obviously the emerging economies will have to share the responsibilities.
Well, ultimately each economy is bothered about its own. We are not bothered about what is happening to USA and Russia or Germany. We have to think about our own economic welfare. So, no country in the world, at least certainly not India at present, all the things we may talk about the global, or here and there give little money for Nepal or Afghanistan, essentially we are concerned about ourselves. Those kind of questions should be addressed at the World Bank and IMF, looking at the global optimal balance.
Right. Okay, one important question here is that where exactly should the highest priority be given when it comes to our own policies in order to deal with this? Should it be given to growth and controlling these inflows, or controlling inflation, liquidity on the domestic front, and in order to boost the export sector? I mean, where exactly should the policy be really?
It is a very good question. The nation or the government needs to really identify clearly multiple objectives, that's various objectives, and then assign them priorities. One of the most important priorities for any government, in my opinion, is that how can the government raise the quality of life of its people, which encompasses almost all other objectives. For instance, raising employment, raising salaries, providing them good infrastructure, providing them goods and services at cheaper rates, and so on and so forth. So how can we really raise the quality of life index? When we talk about the mechanism needs to take into consideration a realistic rate of rupee vis-a-vis other currencies. When we talk about realistic rate, then we need to make a comparison between the PPP. Originally, the rates were determined on the basis of purchasing power parity. Later on, it was determined on the basis of demand and supply, international demand and supply for currencies. Somebody who can influence demand and somebody who can influence supply, which means the foreign exchange trader can even influence this. Now, when we talk about this, what is in the best interest? Not of one particular sector. Of course, that sector cannot be ignored altogether. Now, when we say this, then it is necessary that in a country like India, which has a large emerging market, large population to be using goods and services, and scarcity of goods and services, as we have found in the last 8 months, inflation is fairly high. That means the goods and services are not sufficient to meet the demand of the people. And therefore, to supply more goods to earn less amount of dollars probably is not justified policy. And one of the studies has even indicated that the growth in dollar terms for exports is much lower than the growth in terms of rupee. And therefore, if you are not earning enough of dollars, then why do you really reduce the value of currency? And then, internationally, the prestige of a nation, in my opinion, to a great extent, and also its strength, economic strength, is clearly indicated what is the value of that currency. I remember in 1982, a pound sterling was almost equal to $1. Because there were 3 years there was a coal miners' strike, and because of the coal miners' strike in UK, the value of the pound went down. Today it is almost 1:1.8, and even before in 1980, a pound sterling was equal to $1.8 or so. Now, if you really, and then gradually, after the coal miners' strike went off, the UK economy got strength. And its currency also becomes strong.
A very, very important point there. We are joined by a caller from Patna, Mr. Gaurav. Please put your question.
हाँ, मैं जानना चाहता हूँ कि भारत सरकार के द्वारा जो आर्थिक नीतियाँ अपनाई जा रही है, तो वो आर्थिक नीतियाँ आखिर किस आधार पर अपनाई जा रही हैं?
Okay. Thanks very much, Gaurav, for that question. Time for a very short break here in the public forum. Stay tuned.
एक ताकत जिसने अन्याय के आगे कभी हार नहीं मानी, जो सदैव सत्य और अहिंसा की राह पर चलता रहा। आज संपूर्ण विश्व जिसके सम्मुख नतमस्तक है, महात्मा गांधी।
इलाज की गारंटी। उस्ताद जी, दमा, मिर्गी और शुगर का शर्तिया इलाज गारंटी के साथ, और पता भी लिखा है, आयुर्वेदिक दवा खाना रामगढ़।
और खा दिया ना कच्चा, ऐसे विज्ञापन ही तो हमें धोखा देते हैं।
बिल्कुल सही। शर्तिया इलाज और चमत्कारिक दवा ये सब झूठ है। ऐसे विज्ञापन कानूनन निषेध है। ऐसे विज्ञापनों की सूचना स्टेट ड्रग लाइसेंसिंग अथॉरिटी को देनी चाहिए।
ड्रग्स और मैजिक रेमेडीज ऑब्जेक्शनेबल एडवर्टाइजमेंट एक्ट 1954 का उल्लंघन करने पर जुर्माना, सजा या फिर दोनों भी हो सकते हैं।
मैं तो समझ गया, और आप?
सस्ती दाल में पोषण करता होगा। बहन जी, रोशनी के माँ पिता आए हैं। नमस्ते। रोशनी की पढ़ाई अच्छी चल रही है। आजकल मैं उसे गणित में जोड़ और घटाने के सवालों का खूब अभ्यास करा रही हूँ। बहन जी, सवाल हो गए। रोशनी की कॉपी तो देखिए, कल 10 में से 8 सवाल ठीक थे, आज सारे 10 के 10 ठीक हैं। शाबाश रोशनी। शाबाश रोशनी।
Welcome back in public forum today, a discussion on currency fluctuation and its impact. And before going into the debate, one of the callers asked us about the economic policies and how they are framed in India. Dr. Das, would you like to respond to that question?
जी, मैं ये तो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण क्वेश्चन है, लेकिन मैं इतना ही कहना चाहूँगा कि हमारे देश की नीति या कोई भी देश की आर्थिक नीति बहुत वर्षों का जो अनुभव होता है अपने देश में और दूसरे देशों में भी, उसके आधार पर बनाई जाती है। और ये आपका प्रश्न जो है इसका जवाब यही है कि अगर आप लगातार ऐसे प्रोग्राम देखते रहें, किताबें पढ़ते रहें, न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ें, एक्सपर्ट्स को सुने, तो धीरे धीरे आपको समझ में आएगा कि ये बहुत ही कॉम्प्लेक्स सब्जेक्ट है और इसमें एक ही इतने क्षण में इसका उत्तर देना संभव नहीं है, और इसीलिए किसी एक विशेष पहलू पर एक चर्चा की जाती है।
Most important thing now is, Dr. Das, as we look up to the kind of response that has been there from the developing or the emerging economies, is keeping in mind the G20 summit. We have seen the first part of that summit with the finance minister of the G20 nations meeting together, and in fact could not really sort out the problems relating to the currency fluctuation, but yes, talking about some sort of reforms in the IMF. Where exactly do you think is the reform idea, the reform plan really headed?
You see, it has not met with tremendous amount of success, but its success lies in terms of the fact that today emerging economies like India, Indonesia, and others have a say in the global agenda setting, and this process has begun. We have been taken more seriously than before. Second thing which has happened is, this is a small measure, but developed countries' macroeconomic performance also would come within the purview of IMF. In fact, this was always there, that they will have to review their performance, but it was never implemented. But that has also come to the fore. which also means that there is greater share of developing countries in global affairs and even developed countries' performances on surveillance. Number three, recently IMF Executive Director and others have talked about the importance of capital control or any other measure which actually does not precipitate the crisis further. This is a departure. I mean, at one point of time, we could never imagine that IMF or World Bank saying something of this kind because their whole ideology or paradigm used to be very, very neoliberal and very distinct. So I think in G20, if you ask me to sum it in one sentence, I would consider not to be a great success, but a step towards developed world and global financial and development institutions seeing the world through the eyes of developing countries and through the eyes of emerging economies.
There's a new landscape altogether of deficit as well as surplus nations after the crisis, and what is really expected, especially from the emerging economies, developing economies, is a greater role of the IMF. Are we really expecting that thing really coming up in history?
Two things. One is increasing role of emerging countries in IMF and World Bank decision making. The other is the relative importance of IMF per se in influencing the global economic decisions. Now, say 20 years ago, IMF had a decisive say in shaping economic policies, say including India. IMF conditionalities based on the loans given by the IMF virtually shaped the liberalization program in many countries, including India. So those days, IMF was supreme. Today, just before the crisis, the stage came, the IMF itself went in such a crisis. Questions were raised about existence of IMF. Because if the member nations like India, China, etc. become strong enough, they don't depend on IMF a few $1 billion. Then IMF relative importance in global policy goes down. And that's what has happened. The biggest question today is asked is, what was the role of IMF in this present global recession? Why they could not anticipate? Why they could not intervene? Such a mega catastrophe has occurred, and IMF remained a silent spectator. So in fact, there are strong views aired at the time, many respected novel-laureate economists have said, disband the IMF and World Bank and reconstitute the Bretton Woods Agreement, which is 60 plus years old right now, 60 years old. So the other point which I referred is increasing influence of emerging economies in IMF. That has happened. And in the latest G20 meeting, it is promised further increase in the share of emerging economies, including India, in the IMF and World Bank decision making. But that will not be today. There is a time sequence.
Right.
So hopefully it will be done. What it means is there is a traumatic change in the global political economic decision making. Even until 5 years ago, the developed countries DA telling the emerging economies, this is what we should do. Now they are saying no. We will also treat you as a partner, not a dependency system anymore. This is the traumatic change result of this global recession. We are not going to develop country anymore saying, you please help us. They are rather telling, America telling China, please help us in restoring my economy. You see the development change. We wish someday India will also come to that stage. We are doing in a minor way. But China, for instance, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where was China? Nothing. Today, America and Europe telling, please rescue us.
It is also important for India because Prime Minister is already on his visit to East Asia, and it is also important to look at our trade ties with these countries, especially the ASEAN nations and the other nations, because that is perhaps lesser than what we have with China. Do you think that happens to be one important area where we need to really have good...
This is an excellent initiative taken by the government of India to look towards East. We need to make our own presence felt, both in terms of economic policies as well as a part of international relations. We live in Asia, and we need to really improve upon the quality of life, not only in India but also in the whole of Asia, and make our presence felt. Trade free trade, for instance, is likely to be possible with Malaysia, which has been agreed between our Prime Minister and Trump, maybe sometime early in 2011. And that would really be a very good stance which has been taken. Similarly, now he is going to Japan, and where he is going to likely to enter into some kind of trade tax. I think it would be really good because the prices, the costs of various goods and services in Asia are much cheaper than in the West. And if there is a free trade, the quality of life would probably, in the whole of Asia, would improve. Although the level of poverty in the Asia is the largest, is the biggest problem in the whole world. As far as IMF is concerned, if I used to say, Malaysia, the first prescription which IMF gives, although their job is to provide macroeconomic financial stability internationally and different countries, 1998, IMF made some prescriptions to Malaysia. Malaysia ignored them, went ahead, they had gone ahead with their own model, and they would come out of the financial crisis which they were facing. Nigeria, in 1983, wanted $2 billion loan from IMF. They straight away said, devalue your currency. They refused. They said it is against the prices of the nation. And at that time, 1 naira of Nigerian was equal to $2.6. Today, $1 is equal to more than 250 naira. That is the state of affairs in the last 28 years or so. Now, these prescriptions are, by the time this help reaches the desiring or the needy country, it becomes too late and the country becomes even
this
more
in
difficult.
fact, yeah, this is the role. It in fact brings us to another point here. But very quickly, Dr. Das, we are almost heading towards the end of this program. Very important here is that if at all we talk about the existence of these emerging economies, because this is the time when the world is debating and the world is in fact going to face a new international economic order. Looking at it, do you think that the emerging economies need to also sort out their policies in terms of the political relations they have and also improve the economic ties they have in order to have a good cluster, or let's say a very healthy cluster of these economies?
Certainly. I think economics and politics in international domain go hand in hand. One feeds on the other. And just the reverse also can happen. So I'm very sure that the time will come when the economic gravity of the world has already shifted to Asia, and the major economies of the West are actually trying to integrate more with Asia. There, the role that India can play, the role that China can play, I think would be looked up to with great expectation. And I am very sure that India is slowly getting prepared to get into the production and economic network.
What is your view, Dr. Bhattachrya, on this again?
Well, definitely India will be increasingly more and more important in the global financial world. There is no doubt about it. But we have not yet come to a stage like China, where we could dictate the price. We will be now gaining increasing importance. But China, for whatever the reason, has got into a position to shake the West. The currency war is a result of Chinese stubborn refusal. Whereas if India plays supposing a currency war, the rest of the world would not be losing their sleep. So what we need to do therefore, we must maintain a stable economic policy, gradually gain more and more strength, and not take adventurous steps.
Okay. So there are lessons for us and there are lessons for other economies also to learn from this. Thanks very much, gentlemen. This was quite a pleasure. That is all we have for you in this edition of Public Forum. Thanks very much for watching us. Thanks.